Greetings to all my new fiends. I have just returned from the surface with my most recent acquisition, Madam Web. Who could have imagined a 2-hour origin story for Uncle Ben's work friend would have bombed so spectacularly? This is movie hell, where the souls of all the films who failed to become blockbuster hits are trapped forever on VHS tape and used to torment those forever cast into the pit where the serpent's thirst for blood is never quenched and the worms feast for all eternity. I am the Film Reaper, procurer of putrid pictures and the master of malodorous movies. Today we are taking a look at the biggest movie star in the world, and the only god we recognize down here, Godzilla. Clearly, I'm a big fan of a guy in a suit, and much like Godzilla, I find humanity to be at best an annoyance, and at worst a plague on the earth to be wiped clean with vengeful fire and wrath. Amongst humanity's crimes is today's film, the American bastardization of Toho's Godzilla reboot, known as Godzilla 1985. Originally released in Japan as simply Godzilla, the film attempted to bring the monster back to his roots as a terrifying atomic metaphor after years of becoming more friendly and ridiculous with each new film. We think of dark and gritty reboots as the modern invention of a creatively bankrupt studio, but it's been happening for decades with these classic monsters. Hammer Studios never shied away from making bloodier and sexier reimaginings of their classic Universal monsters. Invasion of the Body Snatchers got a late 70s New Hollywood remake, and in 1982, John Carpenter remade The Thing from Another World as one of the most disgustingly terrifying horror movies of all time. Even Goji's old rival, King Kong, had his own modern reimagining where he climbed the World Trade Center instead of the Empire State Building. This was actually parodied with the poster for one of Godzilla's sillier movies, Godzilla vs. Megalon, later that same year, where the titular monsters were depicted fighting atop the Twin Towers. Makes me wonder if there are 9/11 kaiju truthers. I mean, jet fuel may not be able to melt steel beams, but what about atomic breath? I'll have to ask next time one of those conspiracy loons come in to rent something. That reminds me, it's time for today's sponsor, BetterHell. Let's be honest, an eternity in the fiery abyss kept company only by the sounds of your own torment can be a real bummer. When you use BetterHell, you will be matched with a trained professional who will listen to your screams and nod sympathetically as you writhe in agony for all eternity. Will your suffering end? No, but sometimes it's nice just to know that someone's listening. So give BetterHell a chance and use code MovieHell at checkout. Toho's The Return of Godzilla was released in 1984, nearly a decade after the company had stopped making Godzilla movies. It ignored all of the silly kaiju wrestling hijinks that came after the original and presented the monster once again as a terrifying atomic beast. The film's success in Japan revived the creature for a new series of slightly more serious films. But there wasn't a huge appetite for a serious Godzilla film from American studios. In the 30 years since the creature first destroyed Tokyo, he had become as much a camp icon as a cultural one. You can see this most easily in another movie released just a few weeks before Godzilla 1985, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. There is a similar scene in the Bad News Bears Go to Japan, and also on Saturday Night Live, where John Belushi would don a Godzilla suit and stomp buildings after sitting down with Gilda Radner's Baba Wawa. This had become the American view of the monster. Cheap, campy, kid stuff. So all of the big American studios passed on Toho's very earnest Godzilla reboot, but eventually cheap genre distributor New World Pictures bought the rights to show the movie in America. To play into American perceptions, they originally planned to redub the film as a spoof, similar to Woody Allen's redubbed Japanese film What's Up Tiger Lily. Producers also felt they needed to add additional American scenes and wanted a tone similar to Leslie Nielsen in Airplane. But to help tie the movie to the original, the producers wanted to bring back Raymond Burr. When Godzilla was originally released outside of Japan in 1956 as Godzilla, King of the Monsters, over 20 minutes of boring non-Americans were replaced with scenes of Burr playing journalist Steve Martin. No, not that Steve Martin. This not-so-wild and crazy guy grounded the story for American audience, while his deep baritone provided weight to what could have been a very silly film. Burr played it very serious indeed, and insisted that New World take Godzilla seriously in their new adaptation. To pay for all of these additional scenes, New World Pictures agreed to extensive product placement from the only soda brand to successfully complete medical school, Dr. Pepper. The movie was also supplemented by several commercials featuring Godzilla and an unnamed female kaiju who are persuaded to stop their rampages by the smooth, refreshing taste of Dr. Pepper. Just what the doctor ordered. To further undercut the intended tone of the new Godzilla film, New World screened the short cartoon Bambi Meets Godzilla before their movie. Marv Newland's cartoon is a masterpiece of absurdist humor, and its brazen flaunting of copyright should be aspirational in today's remix culture. It's hard to imagine a theatrically released movie today opening with their character stomping on a named Disney Corporation intellectual property, but let's bring that energy back. I want to see Megan slice Buzz Lightyear's throat before the credits of her next movie. Anyways, the film starts when two monsters emerge from a 30-year slumber. Thanks to his familiar screonk, we know the first is Godzilla, and the second is that jerk Steve Martin. Look, I know the movie goes out of the way to call him Martin or Mr. Martin, since the real Steve Martin was a huge star at this point. But it doesn't take a man with two brains to realize I'm going to keep making these jokes through the whole movie. Burr was reportedly paid $50,000 to reprise his role in Godzilla 1985, but insisted that all of his scenes be filmed in a single 8-hour day. Also, he refused to learn his lines, and the crew had to hide teleprompters throughout the set for him to use. Also, he refused to drink a Dr. Pepper on camera. Guess he really hates those cans. Back in Japan, journalist Goro Maki, played by Ken Tanaka, finds a fishing boat that was attacked by Godzilla. Or maybe it was Norman Bates' mother. Like a lot of sailors, he gets a bad case of kaiju-sized crabs, but is saved by lone survivor Kenny Akumura. Maki wants to publish the news of the attack, but the government is worried this could lead to hysteria. Anyways, the editor would much rather he focus on getting pictures of that menace, Japanese Spider-Man. But Maki won't be deterred, and he meets with Dr. Hayashida, who gives one of those classic "man is the true monster" speeches. And since this is a movie, the woman assisting the professor just happens to be the sister of the lone survivor of the Godzilla boat attack. What a small world! Maybe even small enough to wear a dinosaur costume and knock over a bunch of cardboard buildings. Godzilla 1985 was released 2 months before Rocky Balboa single-handedly ended the Cold War by defeating Ivan Drago in Russia, so tensions threatened to erupt when the Soviets blamed the US after Godzilla destroys one of their submarines. The American military personnel meet to discuss the situation with their most trusted advisor, Dr. Pepper. The Cold War brinkmanship forces Japan to admit to the world that Godzilla is back. The good old US of A and USSR actually agree on something. They both want to nuke Japan off the face of the earth as soon as Goji makes landfall. And for some reason, the Japanese aren't in love with this plan. But that doesn't stop those sneaky Soviets from arming up. Now, at this point, Godzilla must feel like the movie is getting a little talky, so he heads to the nearest town. There he finds a nuclear power plant and takes a big ol' hit off that reactor like it's the world's biggest bong. He is lit, but like so many stoners before him, is distracted by some birds and wanders off. Things are getting serious as the US military takes a plane, train, and automobile over to retrieve Steve Martin while his grandson gets in on that sweet Dr. Pepper product placement. This leads to one of the movie's weirder scenes. Maki, Kenny, and the professor turn on Predator vision to study Godzilla. They deduce that since he is an atomically mutated dinosaur, and dinosaurs are related to birds, that Godzilla must have some instinct to flock with birds, I guess? I really think this scene would be much more powerful if Sam Neill threatened to disembowel an annoying teen during the explanation. Regardless, they plan to use bird sounds to make Godzilla go wherever they want, including making him walk into an erupting volcano. Seems like a very simple plan. No notes. Back on the American set, they are doing what America does best, watching people on screens and complaining. In the original film, Raymond Burr was cleverly inserted into the story using body doubles and a new Japanese character who translated things and explained the local customs. But in this flick, all the added scenes are just a bunch of dirty, rotten scoundrels standing around on a cheap set. I didn't realize the Pentagon's strategic control room was set up with card tables. Was Godzilla 1985 the year it came out, or the reshoot budget? Aside from these completely unnecessary interruptions, one of the biggest changes made by New World Pictures was a scene where a Russian crewman uses his dying strength to launch a nuclear missile at Tokyo. This was changed from the original, where the sailor is actually trying to stop the launch. But it was 1985 after all, and we couldn't have any sympathetic depictions of those evil Ruskies, could we? Godzilla returns for more destruction, and though I am but a skeletal embodiment of death who will never know the soft caress of a lover's touch on my skin or the taste of a sumptuous peach on my lips, I imagine it is similar to the warm feeling I get at my very core when a guy in a rubber Godzilla suit starts wrecking models of Tokyo. The big guy had never looked better thanks to the largest effects budget in Toho's history up to that point. While most of the scenes were done with the standard man-in-suit technique, the suit and miniature effects here all look really great. In addition to the suit, worn by veteran kaiju actor Kinpachiro Satsuma, there was also a 16-foot-tall robotic Godzilla built for close-ups, and a life-sized, crane-operated foot. The Godzilla animatronic, called Cybot, because Japan is amazing at naming things, looks great, except for the eyes, which sometimes malfunction and give the big guy a look that may best be described by today's youth as cringe. Anyways, the Japanese have a new gadget they think can bring down Godzilla, the Super X, a plane with radiation shields and cadmium missiles. They managed to distract Godzilla, or maybe he thought he saw some birds, and shoot the missiles into his throat, making him stumble around like a drunk Mel Gibson before finally passing out against a building. Thank goodness he doesn't say anything crazy racist. It is at this moment of victory that the Russian nuke finally gets around to launching, and Japan knows the one country they can count on, the country that has always had their back, the one country who would never do something as sadistic as dropping an atomic bomb on a major Japanese city just to sacrifice their lives to potentially save American ones. Right? Right? American missiles intercept the Soviet nuke, but it irradiates the atmosphere, causing a lightning storm that wakes Godzilla. This is when the film really misses Akira Ikafube's iconic score. It would make this whole scene hit the way it's supposed to. But even without the proper accompaniment, Goji starts wrecking the suddenly not-so-Super X. But his rampage of Tokyo is interrupted when the professor starts his bird call machine, luring the monster towards the volcano. I just have to say, of all the impossible scenarios that have allowed humans to defeat Godzilla over the years, using bird calls to lure him into a volcano is definitely the dumbest. And I'm including the idea of building a giant robot Godzilla just to fight him on that list. I mean, that's at least fun to watch, but this is just a slow, sad march straight into a volcano. At least there is some mournful music playing. I assume that's from the guilt for just how dumb this ending is. The American version goes one step further and has Raymond Burr eulogize the monster during the death scene. He starts out by basically reading the lyrics to the Blue Oyster Cult song before calling Godzilla a strangely innocent and tragic monster. What? I love the big atomic dino, but I don't know how innocent something that's killed thousands of people can be. If nothing else, Burr's speech can at least be seen as the obituary to the era of Godzilla he ushered in. We can debate the morality of softening the national blame for the horrors that inspired Godzilla to give the film a broader cultural impact, but it's worth considering that without the original Americanized version, Godzilla and his anti-nuclear message would not have reached nearly as many people as he did. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the entry point for America's understanding of what happened to the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki should not be Godzilla. But one thing we can all agree on is that someone dressed like this, using this voice, is not the best person for that kind of subtle and nuanced discussion. Needless to say, Godzilla 1985 did not find an audience in theaters. Despite the huge marketing push for Dr. Pepper and New World Pictures, it opened up in 17th place. Critics seem to have been confused by the comparatively serious approach to Godzilla. On Siskel and Ebert, both reviewers expressed disappointment that the movie wasn't campy, low-budget schlock. Maybe it was a bit too serious for younger fans as well, who instead spent the summer hanging out with Marty McFly and the Goonies. Older fans had certainly moved on to new types of monsters. 1985 was the year Freddy Krueger's A Nightmare on Elm Street hit theaters. Jason was back in Friday the 13th Part 5, and zombie classic Return of the Living Dead shambled out of a graveyard. All of these films offered way more sex and blood than Godzilla. The original movie was a modest success in Japan. Toho produced 6 sequels before killing off Goji again in Godzilla vs. Destroyer, but Godzilla 1985's failure in the States ensured most of these movies would not be widely seen in America until after the release of Roland Emmerich's much-despised Godzilla. Toho remains so unhappy with Godzilla 1985 that it has never officially been released on any format other than VHS. All subsequent releases of Return of Godzilla contain only the original Japanese version. So, if you'd like to watch this train wreck for yourself, you'll need to dust off that VCR, or you can always come down to my screaming room here in Movie Hell.